physical contact with people in the Sangha on this retreat. Just knowing that there are others out there who are trying to practice the Dharma just like us, who are trying to practice mindfulness, who at times will lose mindfulness just like us. There's going to be nearly 50 people involved in those different processes who are trying to practice ethics, who are trying to practice metta, and so on. We will all have our victories and shortcomings, and we are not alone. And I think it's really important to feel connected to other people in that. Otherwise, I think sometimes the danger is that you can feel isolated and you feel, oh, it's my shortcoming. Actually, no, it's a kind of a collective shortcoming in a way, which we can explore with others in study groups, in GFR groups or TFO groups, if you call them that these days, in chapters and so on. Yeah. So in this way, I think it's really important that we carry around a kind of a sense of being connected to the Sangha in our practice, and that we are sharing our efforts to practice with other people. I personally find that a very effective supportive condition. Now, I think it's very early on, that I think it's really important that very early on in the retreat, and I'd say this afternoon, that we put aside some time to sit down quietly and reflect what conditions, in addition to those which the program is going to provide, what conditions will we put in place during this urban retreat to help sharpen and deepen our practice. And bear in mind, this is an urban retreat. So things such as a commitment to eating at least one meal mindfully, with focus, just on the experience of what's going on when we eat that meal, the movement of muscles and skin in the jaw, the movement of the tongue in the mouth whilst we're eating, the sensations of taste and so on. So we're being mindful when we're eating and not eating as well as, for example, reading a book or reading the paper. Just eating, just sitting down and eating. And we're all going to eat on this retreat. And we all have the capacity to be mindful. So that's one thing which you can do. Or you could commit to sitting quietly for 20 or 30 minutes every day on this retreat, or as many days as you can, reflecting on what you've learned from the retreat. Or you could commit to simplifying your life, doing one thing at once throughout the retreat. If you're boiling the kettle, you boil the kettle. So you don't boil the kettle and then go and do 10 other tasks. You just boil the kettle. You sit, you stand by the kettle and you listen to the gradual increase of volume as the bubbles start to form in the water. It's quite an aesthetic practice, actually, listening to a kettle boil. When you vacuum, you just vacuum. If you write an email to somebody, you just write an email to somebody. If you've got children, you give them your full attention. If you're working on a spreadsheet, that's your focus. So just doing one thing at once is a great way to simplify your life. And you can do that during this retreat. You can commit to that during this retreat, if you like. You might also consider framing your commitments during this retreat as precepts. Now, they could be the 5 or 10, you might make a commitment to the 5 or 10 precepts, or you might make up a specific precept for this retreat. For example, I am going to boil a kettle and that's all I'm going to do. That is my precept. I think it's also really important that we consciously decide that we are on retreat. We consciously say, I am on retreat. and keep focused on the purpose of the urban retreat while we're engaged in the program and also in our everyday lives. And the purpose of the retreat is to help us sharpen and deepen our spiritual practice within our everyday lives. And in this particular urban retreat, using the Heart Sutra as a guide. Otherwise, I think, our attendance on this retreat could very easily just become a bolt-on, something nice to do with other people. And that's missing the point of urban retreats. They're not bolt-ons. They're a conscious, deliberate setup, if you like, to help you sharpen and deepen your practice within everyday life and for you to gain confidence that you can be an effective spiritual practitioner in everyday life. Now, in the spirit of this retreat, it's an urban retreat, just to say that you can dip in and out of activities as you wish according to your daily life. And we understand that some of you might not be able to come on everything, and that's fine. Just come to what you can. So the spiritual focus of the retreat, of this retreat, urban retreat, is the Heart Sutra. Yeah, it's a sutra which I've personally been very drawn to from a perspective of Shraddha, which I'll say a little bit later. But one thing which we'll also be mentioning as well, Dharmakrunya and myself, and probably Sagaramati, that scholarship is always evolving and different perspectives are emerging on the Heart Sutra. But I think the central message remains the same, even though scholarship might be saying it's that message is reached in different ways. But Sagaramati will be telling us all about that. It's it's a profound and direct text. All Buddhas, we are told in the Heart Sutra, have and will rely upon the wisdom of the Heart Sutra. That's how profound it is. All Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom and so on and so forth. Not only that, the words of the Heart Sutra, when realized for ourselves, allay all pain. Hear and believe its truth, you know, the words that allay all pain, in terms of dukkha, that is. Of course, it's not the words that allay the pain, it's our practice of the words. It's our reflection on the words, I think, to realize the spiritual truths for ourselves, which will then allay all dukkha. And then we are asked to believe its truth. Hear and believe its truth. And I think, well, from my own experience, kind of got a deeper trust in the Heart Sutra through practicing the words of the sutra. What form is emptiness, emptiness only form? Really reflecting upon that really famous line, for example. And one practice to help us to see the truth being pointed to by the words of the Heart Sutra is reflection on the 5 skandhas, which Tejananda will be taking us through Tuesday and Wednesday. Because the 5 skandhas are right towards the beginning of the Heart Sutra, aren't they? No, eye, ear, nose, and so on. So I urge all of us, and I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody else, to create the conditions during this week whereby we can reflect deeply on the words of the Heart Sutra and the truths they communicate. And finally, I just want to say, from a personal, from my relationship with the Heart Sutra, far from being a dry, analytical and intellectual text, I think it's a devotional text. I think it's a deeply devotional text. I think devotional Shraddha are part of, I think, spiritual life, but I also think approaching the Heart Sutra is best approached with a sense of Shraddha and devotion, and maybe awe even of the profundity of what's been communicated. Now, Sagaramati, you might want to rip to shreds what I've just said, but that's fine. Let's have a debate about that. So let's try and create these moods, these spiritual moods throughout the retreat as well. Devotion, Shraddha, respect. And we can do this throughout the retreat in a way that works for us. It might be recalling somebody in the Sangha who we're really fond of, who we've seen really change. Somebody who's made significant change in their lives to relieve suffering in their lives. I find that deeply moving. I find that deeply confidence giving, that people can make fundamental changes in their lives. It might be recalling the Buddha and his qualities. It might be calling to mind a bodhisattva, Vajrasattva or Moggasiddhi, whatever it is, and reflect upon their qualities. Whatever way works for you during this retreat. And in the evenings, we will be performing puja together, in which we can cultivate these spiritual moods of reverence and Shraddha and so on. So the program is deliberately, relatively simple. The program is deliberately, relatively spacious, giving us time to engage and practice with the material. And as I said, preferably this afternoon, sitting down and clarifying what we will do to make this a retreat for ourselves. What are we going to do to make this a retreat rather than just a bolt-on, a nice to do, in a particular week in November 2021, so that it can go as deeply as possible for us. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. I just want to now introduce Sagaramati. I must have the stickiest paper ever. My notes, all the pages are really stuck together like with Evo stick. As I said this morning, Sagaramati, I'm a big fan of yours. I think over the years, you've given so much service to the movement and the order in many different ways. And I do have your biog in front of me, which I can give details of. But I just wanted to say thank you very much personally for all the work you've done to help individuals and the movement and the order clarify the Dharma. You've got a passion, I think. You've got a passion, enthusiasm and dedication, and combined with a really sharp intellect that has devoted, that you've given years of devotion to studying the Dharma and clarifying it, so that we can engage with the Dharma ourselves accurately. What is the Dharma actually saying? What is the Heart Sutra actually saying, for example? And Sagaramati, you led a day here for the local order a few years ago now. We did a study, I've forgotten what sutra it was, but it was the best order day I've been on. You're engaging and witty, superb scholarship, and and challenging. And I love hearing your stories about your connection to Bhante, which we haven't got time to go on. So Sagaramati was first made contact with movement in 1972 in London, in North London, and he was ordained in 1974. And I like this bit, in a squat next to the archway centre by Bhante Sangharakshi. So he wasn't ordained on a fancy 3 or 4 month retreat. He was ordained in a squat. That's the way things, I guess, things were done in those days. And also, importantly, he founded, ran, and partly financed Dharma Chakra tapes between 1974 and 1980. And Dharma Chakra tapes, I guess, superseded, the online versions of that, like Free Buddhist Audio, for example. So thank you very much, Sagaramati. I personally made use of Dharma Chakra tapes for many years. And also, we all have a connection with Sagaramati. He was one of the co-founders of the Manchester Buddhist Centre. So we all have a connection with him. Everybody here today has... What? Sagaramati?
I was the founder.
No, you muted. You muted. Oh.
I muted, am I?
Oh dear, that's not good.
Ah.
Anyway, I'll just carry on while Upeksha Priya sorts out the technicalities. You can correct me in a minute, Sagaramati.
Okay.
Okay, and finally, he asked Bhante what he should do with his spiritual life once he came back from a co-lead, being involved in an ordination retreat to Tuscany. And one of the options he said to Bhante is, should I go to university and study for a degree in religious studies? And Bhante said, yes. So that's what Sagaramati did. And I'm really glad he did, because that resulted in him doing a PhD on Nietzsche and Buddhism. And he wrote a book on Nietzsche and Buddhism. And Bhante, it was in the top 5, I think. It was one of 5 books that Bhante Sangharakshi said that we should all read. So there you go. And I've read it and it's great. And in fact, Sagaramati, I invited Sagaramati to lead a retreat on Nietzsche and Buddhism for the Oslo Sangha, and it was great. It was great. So thank you very much, Sagaramati. We're still having technical issues. It's on now. Sagaramati?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hang on. No, you're not.
We can hear him on Zoom.
Yeah, I'm wondering if your laptop has just got the volume down in the building, and that's why you can't hear him and we can.
Sagaramati, hello.
Not on the laptop.
Yeah.
Great, we can hear you. Okay,
You
Sagaramati.
Yeah.
Off you go.
Okay. So you hand it over to me.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Look at your background, Sagaramati. All those books. Have you read them all?
Well, a lot of them are kind of books you need to look up. I've read like a Nietzsche and things like that.
Oh, okay.
All the Buddhist books, I haven't read through every Pali Canon. You know, they're books that are necessary for background,
Okay.
not photographic background.
Yeah.
You do.
Okay.
So Mahashraddha.
Yes, Sagaramati.
No, he asked me to do a talk on the Heart Sutra,
Oh.
right? And I said no. I said I don't want to do a talk on Heart Sutra. I gave up chanting it years ago, and I don't particularly. I think it's. I'll go to try and open it up a bit, but it doesn't make sense in some ways. I'm sorry about this, but there's a lot of stuff in the last few years on this. Yeah, so. I've had a little thing that says never a sutra, but a bit of another sutra, right? So there never was a Heart Sutra, yeah? How the Heart Sutra came about was there's a A Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines. That's a big one. It's sometimes called the Large Sutra. It's a Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines. And when was it about? Yeah, Kumarajiva, he's a Chinese chap who he's very famous for all the translations he did from Sanskrit into Chinese, etc. So he translated the 25,000 lines into Chinese, right? And that was done in 403 to 404 Christian era. But sometime or other, somebody cut a bit out of it, whether some people say it was him, nobody's actually sure, but the Chinese they don't like flannel, yeah? It's like I remember somebody said when Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism, went into China, it was too flowery. And what they did was they just cut everything down. They wanted the source, like Zen's a bit like that. So they wanted the heart of this bigger sutra. And so they passed it around, and it got the name, probably in Chinese, of the Heart Sutra, right? Then the next stage is a Xuanzang. Xuanzang was a very, very famous Chinese. He was a Buddhist monk, and he was also a translator in China. One of the things he did was deal with the Sanskrit texts coming in and put them into Chinese. But he felt like a lot of the Sanskrit texts, they weren't quite, there's something not right, right? So he decided to go to India himself and actually come back with hundreds of texts. That's what he did. So he was, when did he do this now? Between 627 and 643, he did the journey, and he spent 17 years in India, in Nalanda, different monasteries, just studying and collecting books, etc. Right? But he had his Heart Sutra in Chinese, and he couldn't find anything about in Nalanda and these great places, and they didn't know anything about a Chinese, a Sanskrit Heart Sutra. So he thought it had been lost. So it was translated into Sanskrit, right? And it's come back, and there's a couple of versions of it, but that's how the Heart Sutra come about, right? So unfortunately, the Perfectionism in 25,000 lines, we've got little bits of it discovered in Gilgit, which is northern Pakistan, maybe a couple of pages. But even then, when you look at it and the Sanskrit, you could see what they took off, but it's not the same. Yeah, it's roughly the same, but it's not the same. So I gave up on the Heart Sutra. When I first joined the movement, I mean, I was a hardcore Mahayanist. I wanted nothing to do with the Hinayana, right? I remember ringing up people and saying, "You Hinayana or Mahayana?" And they'd say, "Oh, Hinayana." "No, I don't want you. I want this. I'm a superior man. I've taken LSD and things like that. I don't want your crap." And when I first went to Puerto Rico, they had a little bookshop, and they had Bhante's Survey of Buddhism, not the modern thing. This is from the books from India. And I remember looking it up and saying, Eightfold Path. I thought, what's all this rubbish? I thought, you mean just like us hippies, just on the verge. One day you'd drop a cup and it'd break, and suddenly you'd be awakened. So it was a long learning process that I wasn't anywhere near anything like that. Yeah. So I went to Sami Ling. That's a Tibetan centre in Scotland. While I was there, I met someone, and I mentioned to them that I'd been looking for a place to go to in London. And he said, "Oh, you should go to the FWBO in Archway." He said, "They're all dope heads there." That's what he said. So I went there, and I was lucky because I got Bhante. Bhante was just about to go on a long year sabbatical down the West Country. So I got to see Bhante and he led the classes. Gradually, I think that maybe studying at university and things like that, it makes you a bit less, it makes you more critical in a good sense, right? So when I read, let's say the Heart Sutra, I think this is our version. I think our version might be, I think we got it from the Rochester, New York Zen Center by chap called Philip Kapleau or Roshi Kapleau. So ours maybe come through Japan. I don't know about that, but that's what I remember. So it says, the Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all 5 skandhas and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. Right. Then it says here then, but it's missing out a word. It's here then, Shariputra. Right. It's not in. I don't think it's in our text. I think it's the one I've got. And this is very common, like in the Diamond Sutra. Again, it's Subhuti. So Subhuti and Shariputra were 2 chief chaps of the earlier tradition. So what they're doing is they're bringing him in to give credence to what they've got. Yeah. But Shariputra, of course, never knew. He was dead long before. So it says Shariputra. So this is the problem one. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is only emptiness. Emptiness only form. Now, see, it doesn't make sense to me to talk about emptiness is shunyata, right? And rupa, rupa is what? It's the, in any perceptual situation, what you see is rupa. Yeah, it's everything, right? Everything is rupa. And sometimes they talk about rupa is made up of the 4 great elements, fire, water, and all that. So rupa is what's out there, right? And we have a mind that sees rupa. There's a lot about, is there something behind it or whatever? We won't go into that because there's a lot of disagreement about things like that. But emptiness is an abstraction. It's not a thing. You can't say rupa is emptiness. It doesn't make any sense at all. I'll show you how to make sense of that. Yeah, because so you got shunya as an adjective, right? And you put a ta on the end of it with a long, and it makes it ness, emptiness, right? So it doesn't mean anything unless you've got to say, well, what do you mean? Yeah. So what we have is the way to get around it is you have to go to Nagarjuna, right? Nagarjuna, because the Madhyamaka were, people, a lot of the other Buddhists who weren't into this, they thought they were nihilists. Yeah, they just taught nothing. Everything ended in nothingness. Right? That's what they thought, and that went on from Nagarjuna's time. He's about 150 to 250 CE, right through to Tsongkhapa in the 15th century. They're defending themselves against the charge of nihilism, and it's mainly because of the doctrine of emptiness. Right? But Nagarjuna makes it clear. This sutta doesn't. The commentaries make it clear. Nagarjuna says, I've actually got a quote somewhere. Yeah, here's one of them. He says, and in Mula Madhyamakaraka, that's what's that? The root verses on the middle way. It's his famous text. He says, dependent arising we declare to be emptiness. He's using the word emptiness there, but he explains what it is. He says, therefore there is no dharma whatsoever that is non-empty. Yeah. So he uses dependent arising all the way through all these works. Usually this comes up that dependent arising and the doctrine of emptiness are the same thing, right? So how you have to read it is what he says is anything that arises depending on conditions, yeah, is empty of inherent existence. That's all it says, right? But they never write that in. Yeah. So anything that arises in dependence on conditions lacks what's called swabhava. Swabhava is its inherent existence, its intrinsic existence, i.e., it doesn't change. It's never been born, it can never die. Right? That's all it means. So they have to go back to the Buddha, the main teaching of what the Buddha, dependent arising, in order to understand what the Madhyamaka are actually talking about. And Tsongkhapa even says the best way to understand their doctrine is through dependent arising. Yeah. So if you think when they're talking about emptiness, they're saying things are empty of any inherent existence. That's all it means. Yeah, that's all it means. I mean, I don't know why this probably came about because the Savastivada tradition, they were the biggest Abhidharma tradition, biggest school in India, really. And somehow or other, they got the notion that the dharmas, because the Buddha didn't talk about dharmas in this way, it's the Abhidharma. They reduced everything to dharmas. And somehow they gave them their own existence. Yeah, they made them eternal. One of the teachers, he says, well, it's like you have gold and you could make a gold pear tree, a gold monkey, a gold Buddha, whatever, right? And they're all distinct things. But if you melt them all down, all you're left with is gold. And that's what dharmas are like. Yeah, they're impermanent, but they go in and out of existence without changing their nature. That's what they said. So this is what the Mahayana are trying to against. Yeah, Nagarjuna and these people, they're against that view. But the Buddha never taught that view. Never. Yeah, the Buddha taught everything is impermanent, insubstantial. Right? There is nothing that is permanent. Even a Buddha is not permanent. You can be permanently awakened, yeah, in the sense that you've seen so much you can't go back into samsara. That's permanent, but that's just a way of talking. It's not that the Buddha's permanent. The Buddha's still, changing. As Bhante would say, Putita Samudpada goes on after awakening, and probably goes on after the awakened Buddha he's passed away. Yeah. So this is how we understand the Heart Sutra. Yeah. So form. What did he say? Where have I got my thing? So an emptiness is no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness is only form. So just remember that what they're talking about, the skandhas are empty of inherent existence because all the skandhas are dependently arisen. And if you do that, you're safe. You'd have to think that when you're doing this. I didn't. I just got rid of it. It was only, when I read the Guardian, I went back and said, oh, this is what they're talking about. Yeah. But the thing is, there's some people, I found in the movement, they do go on emptiness as if it's a thing. Yeah. Interestingly, we have an order member called Sridhapa. Yeah, he's originally from Edinburgh, and he fell in love with Scandinavian languages. He loves languages, and he ended up as a school teacher in Oslo. And he got ordained. He's called Sridhapa. He's now out in Taiwan. There's a big Buddhist place, and like a big university, it does everything. He's out there learning Chinese now. But he translated the Diamond Sutra, right? Because Kansa's Diamond Sutra is wrong. Yeah, it's to do with the nature of compounds. But if you want to talk about that, ask me. I don't want to go into all that stuff. And so you mentioned this book, The Heart of Buddhist Wisdom. This is meant to be a good translation, right? But I just suddenly noticed it said the Heart Sutra, and it's at the back of the book. It's only 2 pages, right? And interesting, this guy is saying the same thing. He says, here form is emptiness, empty form, etc. He says, this is the most famous passage of all the perfection of wisdom literature. Indeed, each line, form, rupa, is emptiness, is one line of the perfection of wisdom literature that most students of Buddhism know. However, the meaning of this passage is not as clear as most people today seem to think. He says, in fact, the claim is odd. It seems to make emptiness into an ontological source of some kind. That's a real existent thing, right? And it's a popular view today, e.g. form. This is Thich Nhat Hanh's translation. He says, form is a wave and emptiness is the water. What rubbish. Sorry, it's rubbish. And he says, but nothing in the perfection of wisdom thought suggests that. And in Madhyamaka thought, treating emptiness as in any way real is an incurable disease. And he quotes in Mula Madhyamakarika, chapter 13:8, and that's what Nagarjuna says. So the term only indicates lack of self-existence. There is no reality reality to label emptiness, right? So that he puts it very well, yeah. So just remember, I mean, I remember there was an American older member, Sagaramati. He was an academic as well, and every time he said Shunyata, I used to say, "You mean dependent arising?" I just did it every time just to get him, you know, just to get through your head. That's what it is, yeah. So the reason emptiness arose, that thing, is probably because of the views of the Savastivada, who thought the Dharmas had their own nature. And the Savastivada were the biggest school in India, really. Yeah. Not all Savastivadins believed that. Yeah, but they were such a big, they scattered all over Gandhara, you know, in northern India. They were huge. So basically, that's what that Heart Sutra is getting. But the other bit is a bit funny as well. Then, so he says, feeling, thought, choice. Well, feeling Vedana, thought isn't, that's sanya. Sanya is what you call apperception, right? So you perceive something with vijnana, consciousness, right? But because we use our experience to recognize what it is. Like if I've seen someone before, I see them again, I recognize that, I maybe not know the name. That's what sanya is. So sanya is, it's got two words, sam is together and jnana is to know. So you know together, i.e. you use your past experience to know or recognize what something is. It's not a concept really. You don't think, you just know. You look at somebody in the street and you know them, you just say, I recognize them. The name comes after. So that's what sanya is. And then he says choice. Well, choice is samskara. So samskaras are karmic dispositions and what they leave in the psyche, right? So you act, it's funny, it shouldn't be samskara. So samskaras are action. Kara means doing, yeah? So samskara is action. It's a karmic action. And that karmic action, if you go to the Yogacara, it leaves a seed, right? And when that seed, the conditions are right, it expresses itself, it becomes another samskara. Yeah, that's how it works. So samskaras are basically all our drives, yeah, all the drives we have. And the thing is, they always put it negative, but samskaras must also be skillful, right? There's a sutta called the, what is it now called? The Great 40. And this is very interesting. Well, there are miccha ditthis. Yeah, there are just miccha ditthis. Yeah, there are sama ditthis, correct views, but with asavas. There's no insight. Yeah, so that's like most of us. We're practicing the Dharma, so that is, we're developing right view and trying to practice what right views are. And then there's right view without the asavas, which is fully awakened. Yeah, the right views, you don't have to have them. You just, that's what you are. So it's important, the three stages. There's the delusion stage. There's a stage where you're still an unawakened being, but you're meditating, practicing the path, going on retreats, etc. But we're still unawakened, but we're moving in the right direction. And then the third stage is when you have insight and you don't have to rely on things. Yeah, you're just naturally skillful. Yeah, just naturally skillful. So that's another thing. But the other bit, which is like, he says, so in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought, or choice, nor is there consciousness. But this is the point. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. That is an extreme view, a miccha ditthi. Right, I've got something, where is it? What have I got for this? Oh yeah. This is a very good book. Don't know if you can see it. It's what's good about it is it's got a lot of the material in the world of Buddhist studies, etc. The thing that is really coming through is the text they find in old Greater Gandhara. So that's kind of southern Afghanistan, northern Pakistan, that area. That whole area was Buddhist. because we know the Taliban started blowing up those cave impressions of Buddha. So that was a very Buddhist place there. Because it's a desert, and some people seem to know there must have been a monastery there or here, and they dig up old texts. So, and this is interesting because the latest ones you find is about 3 or 4 are recognizably very early Mahayana. There's a Perfection Wisdom in 8,000 Lines, but they're very different to what Kunze translated in the Perfection Wisdom 8,000 Lines. And so it's quite a thing to find this. So this sutta is saying, no ear, nose, body, mind, etc. But what this is one of the sutras says, what is it? This is taken from they haven't got a name for this sutra. They call it the Bajur Mahayana Sutta. Bajur is the area where it was found, right? And he says, like, the Buddha says things like, I do not perceive a mental construction, let alone a non-construction. I do not perceive the coming into existence, let alone a non-coming into existence. I do not perceive a grasping, let alone a non-grasping. I do not perceive an apprehension, let alone a non-apprehension. But this is the good bit. I do not perceive an origination of dharmas, let alone a non-originating of dharmas. Yeah, I do not perceive the inherent nature, the swabhava of dharmas, let alone the non-inherent nature of dharmas. I do not perceive cessation of dharmas, let alone the non-cessation dharmas. Yeah. So this is the middle way, early Mahayana, right? So it's, you don't perceive this or that. So they're saying here, you know, there's no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Well, it's actually more correct to say there is an eye, ear, tongue, body, mind, because we wouldn't have these sutras if there wasn't. So, and I've got on to people about it, and they like it. I said, well, you should go and see a doctor or something, you know, because you just want to not exist. So no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. When they're saying, the Buddha would say, I do not perceive an eye, an ear, body, and I do not perceive a non-eye. So that's a middle way, right? The middle way means dependent arising, that's all. Because things are not permanent, because we say they fade away. But at the same time, they're not non-existent because they say they arise. So, I mean, that's the whole of Buddha. Oh. Sorry, I'll just check this. Hello, Satipala. I'm in the middle of a Zoom talk. So,
would you ring me back then?
I'll bring you back when I'm finished. Yeah, okay.
All right, Dan. See you. Bye.
Bye, Satipala. So dependent arising says, you know, it's very difficult to understand. It's easy to understand the meaning of what they say, but it's very difficult to see it within one, right? So like one of the things we have to practice is guarding the doors of the senses. Yeah. So guarding the doors of the senses is you have to be alert when something, well, even what Bhante said to me, he said, well, you could feel murderous, but that's not karmic, that's vipaka from the past. He said, as long as you don't act on it. Yeah. So the thing is with the guardian of the senses, we have to be, one of the things we have to realize is what is coming up, is it skillful or unskillful? Yeah. And if it's unskillful, we might express it, but if we did express it, we'd apologize, sort of thing. Yeah. If you were ethical and you do something nasty like that, it's natural to feel remorse. No, this isn't guilt, it's just remorse, right? So this is the point. There is an I, but it's not permanent. That's all they're saying. To say there's no I is not really the case. Yeah. I mention it because I've argued with people and they like this. I just don't understand how somebody would like it. You know, want to go out of existence. So basically that's about it. You know, but you could just go into the right path at the end. He says, no ignorance or end of it, nor all that comes from ignorance, no withering, no death, no end of them. Nor is there pain or cause of pain. cease of pain, or noble path to lead from pain. So that's much more middle way. Yeah, one can accept that. And the other thing is this thing called a Dharini. Nobody's sure what a Dharini is. It's an entirely Buddhist term. One of the scholars, Janatya, she thinks it comes from Semitic time, like so Gandhara. I mean, you had Persians there and all other people with different languages, right? And a lot of that got into what was called the Gandhari language. So in the texts we're talking about, the early ones, are written in Gandhari language, right? So you have to learn another language to read these earlier texts. So a Dharini, sometimes it's like, it's certainly not a mantra. Natya thought it could be like a magic spell or something like that. So then they go into the radiant peerless mantra, which is Gati Gati Paragati Parasangati Bodhiswa, right? Which is fine. No, nothing wrong with that. So the only thing I'm getting at is like, when you talk about emptiness, you must say this is only understood as dependent arising. That things are empty of existence because they are dependently arisen. So there's no thing that ever has its own existence. Tsongkhapa does it much better, because Tsongkhapa in 1400 and 1500s is defending himself against this nihilistic charge. And he's very good. Tsongkhapa is really worth reading. He says, what is it? He says, we do not deny the existence of a seed. What we deny is the seed has its own eternal existence. That's all we say. That's the whole Madhyamaka position. Nothing else. It is nothing but dependent arising. And he says that. Dependent arising is that. So we just got to realize that whenever emptiness and shunyata, etc., if you take it on its own, it's mumbo jumbo. Yeah. It's just an abstraction that has nothing to touch or smell or understand. It's an abstract noun. Yeah. And you break it down, it refers to form, etc. And it tells you that nothing has inherent existence. Nothing can exist in and of itself. But that's what we're trying to get rid of, isn't it? We think we have a self. Yeah, we might rationalize and say, yeah, I know I've not got a self, but we do act as if there is a me, isn't it? I mean, when you're looking out, to me, it always seems the same me that's looking. It changes its mood occasionally, but it's hard to find. So this is the emptiness of inherent existence is what means that it's the same with us. We don't have something called a self because it's changing every moment. And what comes in our mind, I mean, it depends on what we're looking at, who we're talking to, what we read, what mood we're in, etc. These are all just showing you that none of these is us. These things arise in our continuum. And we've got this self-consciousness that seems it's separate from all that. So we think there's what the Upanishads call the witness. Because it's a bit like that. I mean, if you think yourself memories from childhood even, I mean, what am I? I'm 77 now. So it's almost like the same you that's looking. Yeah. But it's hard to see that that is changing all the time. That's a difficult bit, I think. Yeah, a difficult bit. So anyway, I think that's about all I've got to say. Is there anything else you want to say? No.
Thank you very much, Sagaramati.
Sorry?
I said thank you.
I hope I didn't disturb your shraddha.
No, you didn't. No. To me, there was nothing controversial in what you said.
Oh.
I mean, I've always related to shunya not as a thing,
Yeah.
but as a noun to point towards dependent arising.
Yeah. But it's an abstract now.
It's an abstract, yeah, and that's that. Yeah. But that's something which we have to be constantly on guard of, don't we, in terms of reification of the self or emptiness or even conditioned co-production,
Yeah.
doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, Nagarjuna says that even Paticca Samuppada is Paticca Samuppada.
Yeah.
Depending on conditions.
Yeah.
It was in the Buddha, basically. That was
Yeah.
what happened.
So can I just kick off a question? Why was Shunyata ever invented, if you like? Why didn't Nagarjuna just say dependent arising? Why did they come up with this word Shunyata in the first place?
Well, that I think I don't understand it.
No.
Nagarjuna says, he actually says, and this is the most important one, that Shunyata and dependent arising are eka arta. So eka is one, arta is meaning. They mean one and the same thing. So you couldn't get it more clear than that. Eka arta. So it's eka, ek, a, and arta is long a, r, was it? R, a, r, t, h, a. I think it is arta. Yeah. Like Arta Priya, if you have Arta Priya, that's the same.
Yeah. Okay.
The gold.
Has anybody got a question? We'll take any questions from in here first, in the shrine room. Has anybody got a question?
Can you hear this at home?
Yes.
Okay, I have another question, Sagaramati. Why did the author of the Heart Sutra mix references to dependent arising? For example, no I, no ear, no nose is not dependent arising, but no ignorance or end of it later on in the sutra is dependent arising. So why have this mix?
A mix.
Yeah. Why have a mix of an extreme view, as you called it, and then later on a right view?
Well, the thing is, it's a concocted thing. Yeah, they took bits out of a big sutra and put them together. Yeah, I mean, I could give you a good example. So we know those like those first verses. Form is no other than emptiness. I mean, I could give you it in the Gilgit manuscript because it's got that bit in it. So it says, Nanya shunyata anyad rupam. So that means form is not one thing and emptiness another. So that's the original, right? And other people, when they, I don't know, when they put it into translate the English, yeah. And that's what it is. And the second one is it says the same, emptiness is not one thing and form another. Form is just emptiness, emptiness is just form. So that's from the actual Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines Sanskrit version. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
But these things are, the trouble is with Buddhist history, we've got huge gaps. But we just don't know. We just don't know. I mean, there's a lot more in Chinese in a sense than we have, we have access to in the Sanskrit and Pali. So that's why, I mean, Bhante, and this is true, because Bhante used to be much more Mahayana, without a doubt, right? But he came in later life. I remember he said to me once, he said, because I used to complain, I used to go with something I was studying in Mahayana, I'd go to Bhante, I said, what's all this stuff? And he said, well, the thing is, you must get your basic understanding of the Dharma from the Pali Sutras. The Pali Sutras, because they're the only existent thing. But we're lucky now because the Pali Sutras were kept by the Theravada. There's a big difference between Theravada Buddhism and the Pali Sutras, right? Because they turn Nibbana into an absolute and things like that. They've got to distinguish the Pali Sutras from the Theravada. But you had all these other schools like the Savastivada, the Mula Savastivadins, the Dharmaguptas, the Mahasangikas, and they all had their canons. So the history is, this is in the Vinaya, there are are two bhikkhus who are ex-Brahmins. And they come to the Buddha and they say, look, we don't think your teaching should be taught in the language of the ignorant people. It should be taught in Chandasa, which means Vedic Sanskrit. But the Buddha makes a rule that his teaching must never be put into Sanskrit. Yeah. So the Pali Canon, I mean, it's not a language. It's not a language. I mean, so the oral tradition had all these dialects, like Mancunian is different from Yorkshire, Dundee, Glasgow. We all speak differently. But in those days, it was sound that counted. So you wrote and spelt as you sound. So when they come to collect the canon together, it was all in Prakrits, different kind of Prakrits. So what they tried to do is to even out all the differences and make one version. Yeah. And that was not really Pali, but it didn't have a name, right? It was because it was only Buddhist text in that form, right? The name comes through the 18th century because when they were doing the commentaries and the text, they divided the difference between them. Pali was the Buddhist text. It wasn't a language. Pali Bhasa, it's a language of the text. And that was different from the commentaries because people wrote commentaries in their own language, like Sinhalese or whatever. And so somehow or other, Pali Bhasa became the Pali language. So it doesn't matter, just a bit of knowledge there for you.
Okay.
But the other schools Sanskritized their Prakrit, right? It's not Sanskrit because it's like, it's near Sanskrit. I'd prefer it if the Pali had done it because it's much easier. Pali I find very difficult. I'm not a linguist, I don't know, but Sanskrit's a bit, because it's I don't know, it's got proper dictionary and stuff like that. So the thing is, these other schools, they had their, you know, we have the Majjhima Nikaya, the Digha Nikaya, things like that. So in the other schools, they called them agamas. Agama means a lineage, really. So you get the Majjhima Agama, that's the same as the Majjhima Nikaya and things like that. So these days, I mean, they're in Chinese. So we've got whole canons in Chinese, yeah. And some of them are from different schools. And so what people like Analio and that's going on now is they look for the counterpart between a Pali Sutta and its parallel in Chinese, right? And what you do is you compare them together. And you compare them together, what they agree with, you know, must be a bit earlier than what came after. What came after might be useful, it might explain things, but that's what we have. So we don't have to rely purely on Pali texts. Yeah. Because all these good people are publishing things now, things like that.
Thank you, Sagaramati. Can we take some questions from Zoom, please? Anybody on Zoom who's got a question they'd like to ask Sagaramati?
Yeah, Shakya Jata.
Yes, please. Sagaramati, could you explain again the meaning of Eka Arta? I missed.
Yeah, sorry. Eka is one. Right? And arta means one meaning. It can mean goal or whatever, but it's usually understood as when Nagarjuna is using it, he's saying they are of one meaning. So arta, A-R-T-H-A. And when they're stuck together, they're just ek-arta. The two A's come together and you get a diacritic above it. So ek-arta. But there's two words, eka-arta.
And you use that to explain what?
Well, Praticit Samutpada and emptiness.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the only way you can understand what emptiness is, it's not in the term because it's a word vague, is that it's dependent arising. And all it means is anything that arises beyond conditions is empty, shunya, of its own inherent existence. Yeah. Everything is impermanent.
Thank you.
And they pass away.
Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to.
Sorry.
Hi, Sagaramati.
Okay.
It's not so much a question, it's kind of a wondering about, you know, what we do with our minds. I found your talk so interesting. And I was reflecting on when you were talking about the no eye, ear, nose,
Yeah.
that of course they're resistant because they arise, and that it was an extreme view. And what I suppose I've always done with my mind, that I hear no eye, ear, nose, and I kind of think, well, of course they're there, but they're not there because they haven't got inherent existence, because they arise dependent on conditions.
They
So
are,
it's never sort of bothered me.
they are there. The eye lives for what, 70, 80 years, and it
Yeah.
changes.
But I suppose what I do with my mind, I think they're there, but they're not there. So I've never.
But they are there, but they're a process. They're like the weather. The sun, clouds going across the sky. The ear is like it's all changing, and the atoms are changing all the time.
Yes, but I suppose it's that thing about it's fixing something with the mind, isn't it?
It's what, sorry?
I suppose it's what am I saying? It's they're there, right?
Yeah.
But because they're changing all the time, they haven't got a fixed inherent existence.
Yes.
Because they're dependent on conditions. So they're like a process, like the seat. You gave these great examples. The seat's there, but it's just dependent on conditions.
Yeah.
So it's kind of empty.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making myself clear, Sagaramati, but I suppose it was very thought-provoking what you were saying. But I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's never kind of bothered me. I've never thought, well, what do they mean, no eye, no nose? Of course they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's just that they're not permanent. One day you haven't, or if you get a disease in your ear, the ear doesn't work, and it's not really an ear, is it?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Or somebody chops it off.
Thank you. Any other questions for Sagaramati from our Zoom audience?
Can I ask a question, please? It's Liz. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Liz. Go ahead.
I've always taken the Heart Sutra. Well, thank you very much, Sagaramati, first for that very interesting talk. I've always taken the Heart Sutra as a bit of a koan. And understanding that dependent arising can't be grasped by the conceptual mind. And koans, as I'm sure you know, are designed to blow the conceptual mind. I just wondered, pardon?
What blows the conceptual mind?
That's the role of the koan, is to sort of knock the conceptual mind out of kilter. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thoughts on that go back to a Greek, Puro, his name is, 3rd century BCE. He's a skeptikos. It doesn't mean skeptic, it means actually an investigator. And it's a bit like Zen, because that's what they do. They investigate until they're stymied. They reach they're like the Zen thing, the guy's on top of the pole and he doesn't really, what happens? So there's the for and against are so even. Yeah. And he just says like, and then something happens and suddenly you reach what's called Ataraxia, tranquility of mind. And he probably met Buddhists. He went with Alexander to India. They were away for about 11 or 12 years. And what we do, he come back and he taught. But the things we know of one of his disciples, Timon, somebody says to him, is that a tree there? He'll say, it appears to me to be a tree. And he won't go any other, he's not asking, he's not going to answer ontological questions. Well, what I see there is what we call a tree. But he is so as you get to this state, and I think the Buddha maybe the Buddha got to this state, because the Buddha, in the first 3 udanas, right? So you have them, when things become manifest of the ardent meditating Brahmana, his dight soul vanishes because he sees thing with its cause. Then the next one is he sees the thing ceasing due to conditions. So this is Praticca Samutpada. And then the third one is the awakening. He disperses Mara's army and lights up the firmament. right? And this is early, because there's a text called Bhante did called the Udana Varga. Yeah. So the Udana Varga is about 1100 verses, but it's got every verse in the Udana, not the prose section. Every verse has got some kind of counterpart. And there's a bhikkhu called Ananda Jyoti says, well, where they're the same as Pali and hybrid Sanskrit are translations of something we don't know. So if they're the same, this must be early. It must be what the Prakrit or whatever said. Yeah. And the interesting thing is the first three Udanas in the Udana Varga and the Pali, they're almost identical, apart from one word, but it means the same thing, right? So this is very early. So I'm getting lost now. What was the question to ask? You were asking
the role of statements that you could say the Heart Sutra, one of them, of actually knocking the conceptual mind off its perch. And so we've got two things that I see here, which is investigation and deep inquiry.
Yeah.
But then we can never ever grasp what we're inquiring into.
Well, I would think like the Buddha, right? So the ardent meditating Buddha. So ardent is the Buddha's his ascetic phase. He nearly killed himself, living on a grain of rice a day. And the jhana bit was what he learned from under Uddaka Ramaputta and the other guy, I forget his name. So he'd exhausted what Indians had to have. There's the asceticism where torturing the body liberates you. And the other one where you go through meditation and you come to the truth through meditation. So he rejected both those. So I can only imagine when he sat under the tree, he was at a loss. There's a story about him watching somebody work or something like that, and he went through the nidanas. I don't sort of think that really. I think the Buddha was stuck. And there's a sutta in Majjhima Nikaya that talks about, so we have upadana. You know what upadana is in the 12 nidanas? So you have feeling, thirst, and grasping, yeah, or clinging. So that's upadana. And this sutta talks about the upadana seta. Seta means the chief, the foremost, the furthest, whatever. So you're in the arupa jhanas, like the sphere of neither perception or non-perception, but there's still that little iota of clinging. And the Buddha says you might as well be far away, because you could get that far, but if you don't let go, you will never become awakened. Yeah. So I feel like that with the skeptics. It's like the Buddha was stuck there, and he was probably going over what he probably at a loss. And the way the Greek skeptical people, they said like something happens, right? Suddenly, boom, awakening. Because the Buddha had given up the last thread of some kind of attachment. Yeah, he disowned everything and was at a loss, but just something little thin strand of clinging. Upadana was there, and he could have just, if it goes, that's it. That's me. That's just what I imagine, really. That's what I imagine. So I mean, a lot of people take the this stuff, like the Heart Sutra as what do you call it? A paradox. Yeah, but what's his name? Sridhapa, etc. Don't agree with that, because they think Kansa didn't understand there's a compound called a bahuvrihi. So it means much rice, right? So my name, Sagaramati, is a bahuvrihi compound, because mati, even without a diacritic on the I, is a feminine noun. Yeah. So I can only have that name if it's changed into an adjective. So I'm he who has a mind like the ocean. It can never be he who is an ocean mind. And Kansa didn't understand these. He made it like what did they say? They say a world system, a lokadhatu. He just says a world system is not a world system. Yeah, that's the paradox. But the fact is that the term lokadhatu is one of these compounds. So you say a world system has no world system, like an inherent world system. And that's the way to read it. That even Swadapa said, what they say, a world system has no world system because it's dependent reason. If you keep adding that in, it goes. But Bhante liked the idea of paradox. Yeah, he liked the idea of paradox.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
another thing. Sorry, just like the last thing we had, the 7 papers that were called, which people call Bhante's Last Will and Testament. And one of the things is we have to go back to the historical Buddha. Yeah, you have to get your basic understanding of what the Buddha is supposed to have taught, because that's the way you can judge what comes after or understand what comes after. And he'd say that, like Tathagata, I remember there was, when I was at Majjhimaloka, Sagaramati was doing a seminar on Tathagata, and Bhante said, well, what are you studying that for? There's only one question: does it or does it not arise depend on conditions? If it doesn't, just put it away. Yeah. Though he did say after, this was in the, we had a chat with him. He said, well, you could say Tathagata is a Buddhist heresy. Yeah. And yet, if you read earlier, Bhante, years ago, he's sort of quite in favor of Tathagata. So you have to get Bhante as he was later on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Sagaramati. Well, I would like to give you a round of applause for what I found a thoroughly enjoyable input. I could listen to you longer, but we've run out of time now, Sagaramati.
Okay.
So I'm going to say thank you. Bye.
Well, thanks for asking me.
Okay, Sagaramati. Thank you. I'll be in touch. All right.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
See you all.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye. Bye. Well, bang goes our schedule. I suggest, what do you think, just sitting for until 12? There was a lot in there. And we can do the red thread ritual. This pass the puja, yeah? Okay. Okay, I'm looking at Dharma Krunya. So we will finish on 12 because we need to, because people have probably planned their day around it finishing at 12. So I suggest we just sit now for until 12. So that's 7 minutes, 6 minutes. And we might want to just contemplate something which Sagaramati said, or we might just want to settle into our body and mind and do a just sitting practice. And I'll ring another bell at 12. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to that session. We're going to come back at 4 o'clock and we're going to be learning how to chant the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit. And by the end of the retreat, and we'll do it call and response, word by word, but by the end of the retreat, we hopefully do it line by line, even without call and response. We'll also do it in English to reflect on it. So Sanskrit and then English and then reflection. So that'll be good. It's great doing the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit. Kind of takes you back historically to what I do. I get a sense of being connected more to the Buddha through doing it in Sanskrit. Okay, so see you at 4 and enjoy mindful eating or whatever you can do. See you later.